Normandy, a region where the hedgerow country lives in perfect harmony with the sea, from the tall cliffs of the Pays de Caux to the vast stretches of beach of the Calvados, to the varied coastlines of the Manche, all the way to the Mont Saint-Michel. The English Channel extends along 400 miles of seashore, contributing to the mild and wet climate. So this is naturally suitable soil for the apple tree to have settled on centuries ago. The growing of the cider apple tree began in Normandy from the 10th to the 12th century, with the introduction of new cider apple varieties from northwestern Spain. It was in 1553 that for the first time Gilles de Gouberville, a gentleman from the Cotentin Peninsula, recorded in his diary cider distillation for purposes of obtaining a brandy for drinking, later to be known as Calvados. Pays d'Auge brands of Calvados became well known and were the first to gain AOC status in a decree of 1942. The Calvados brands produced in 10 other areas also come under Appellation d'Origine regulations. In 1984, they in turn rose to AOC status under a single name, Calvados. Finally, in 1997, Calvados du Donfrontais became an Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée brandy, with recognition of its special quality, being made from perry pears. At least 30% perry pears go into the composition of the ciders for distillation. 3 sets of specifications regulate the 3 Calvados appellations. They define the area of their production and rules for their manufacture and marketing. All the operations leading to the production of these brandies have to be carried out within these geographical areas. Apple and pear harvest, the manufacture, then distillation of the ciders, then aging of the brandies. Today, AOC Calvadoses account for 70% of the overall production of Calvados, including Calvados Pays d'Auge, 29%, and Calvados Donfrontais, 1%. With over 50,000 acres of orchards identified for Calvados production, the orchards of Normandy offer a magnificent bouquet of 7 million trees and today has 2 faces. Apple and pear grown as standard trees, which corresponds to the traditional Normandy landscape, and orchards of half-standard trees, more suited to the demands of modern farming. The apple harvest is done either by hand or by machine. It begins in October, lasting until late November, depending on how early or late the different varieties ripen. Categorized in 4 families: bitter, bittersweet, sweet, and sour, cider apple varieties are associated from planting so as to set off each other's tastes. Hence, the orchards comprise no less than 70% of bitter and bittersweet varieties and no more than 15% of sour varieties. After being sorted and washed, the fruit is crushed or grated into a pulp. This pulp is then pressed to obtain the juice, known as the must. The must is immediately placed in vats to ferment and become cider ready for distilling. Fermentation, whereby the sugars in the must are turned into alcohol, is done slowly and in an entirely natural way. It takes a minimum 28 days for AOC Calvados, 42 days for Calvados Pays d'Auge and Calvados Donfrontais. The cider is turned into Calvados by distillation, an operation which involves extracting and condensing the cider's alcoholic vapors and volatile substances, including the aromas forming the main ingredients of the bouquet. Depending on the AOC category, distillation is done using either a pot still or a column still. The pot still, compulsory for AOC Calvados Pays d'Auge, is made out of copper elements and involves double distillation. The cider is placed in the boiler and heated. The alcoholic vapours rise up and are collected in the head, go along the swan neck, then through the coil, which plunges into a tank of cold water. On coming into contact with the coolant, the vapours condense into a liquid. The heads and tails, the vapours at the beginning and end of distillation, which are very rich in higher alcohols, are eliminated to obtain the brouillis or petite eau containing 28 to 30% alcohol. The second heating is to distill this small water. The heads and tails are also separated off to preserve only the heart of distillation, called the bonne chauffe. This should not exceed 72% on leaving the still. During a subsequent cycle, the cider is introduced into the cider heater, which helps to cool the alcohol vapours passing through and to preheat the cider awaiting distillation. The column still is compulsory for making Calvados d'Enfantais. It is also often used for AOC Calvados. The cider passes through the heater chamber and reaches the top of the stripping columns. It comes down through overflows from plate to the boiler, losing alcohol on the way owing to the heat. The vapour produced from the depleted cider rises up again and is enriched in contact with the cider and the volatile elements, alcohol, esters and aromas. The vapour also passes through the plates of the smaller column, the concentration column. It is condensed in the heater chamber to deliver a distillate at under 72% strength following extraction of the heads and tails. Depending on the AOC category, Calvados cannot be put on sale until it has been aged for a minimum 2 or 3 years in oak casks. The exchanges between the colourless young brandy, the wood and the surrounding air will give the Calvados its colour, aromas and fine taste. The older it becomes, the more its colour deepens and the smells of fresh apples develop into more complex aromas of stewed apples and wood, as well as vanilla, honey, spices and walnut flavours. The cellar master selects the brandies and watches over them throughout the aging process. Like an alchemist, he engages in skillfully blending brandies of different ages and from different soils or harvests. Blending is a tricky operation where tasting is everything. It requires great skill in associating the complementary qualities of each brandy in order to build up the character of a Calvados. The label identifies the Calvados through a number of indications, the main one being the marketing denomination, i.e. the appellation name. The indication Production Fermière may also be added on the labels for brandies produced exclusively on the farm. The mention of the age where indicated must comply with the following rules. In the case of a blend, only the age of the youngest brandy is indicated. So a 25-year-old brandy may include brandies 40 or 50 years of age. A specific vintage indicates that the Calvados is taken entirely from one and the same distillation. It is also recommended to indicate the year of bottling on the label, as Calvados no longer ages once it has been bottled. Calvados is popular both in France and in many other countries for its originality, its quality, and its authenticity. Over 50% is exported around the world, the biggest markets being Germany, Belgium, and Switzerland. For new drinking opportunities, as an aperitif or at receptions, 2 or 3-year-old Calvados is served on ice, as a long drink with tonic or in cocktails. Since 1997, professional and student barmen throughout the world meet each year to take part in the Trophées Internationaux des Calvados Nouvelle Vogue Awards and to propose new Calvados-based cocktail creations. For cooking purposes, the fresh apple aromas of young Calvados really come into their own. Whether used for marinades, flambeing or deglazing, the bouquet of Calvados is brought out in sauces, in a terrine, and in desserts. And to whet your appetite in the middle of a meal, we must not forget the Trou Normand, a small glass of Calvados downed in one go, either neat or on a ball of sorbet. Tasting a Calvados hors d'âge is something to keep for quiet occasions or with special company. Served in a tulip glass, which is ideal for concentrating and restoring its aromas, at the end of a meal, to extend an evening, after a tasty cup of coffee, with a square of black chocolate. The taste of Calvados, there's nothing like it.